Hello, we're going to talk about waste treatment in the solid form in this particular video. This is part of my class, Environmental Matters in Municipalities at Knox College. What is solid waste? You probably thought about that at some point. Here we're going to define it as the waste material that's solid, leaving a commercial, industrial, or residential entity. So as opposed to that which is flushed down a drain, this is particularly going to be those things that are traditionally put in a garbage can, right? They're taken from a site to some other site. They don't move down pipes very well, so because they're not in the liquid or gaseous form. Examples would be bottles, wood, grass cuttings, appliances. It also includes hazardous materials that might be in those bottles or containers or batteries. Medical materials, farm runoff might qualify. Munitions, this is often overlooked by the general public. Animal carcasses might fit this description. Now, in the United States, we are a major producer of waste, as we might expect. According to this, we are number one per capita in terms of daily waste generation. About 2.6 kilograms. It's about 5.7 pounds per day, or about 2,000 pounds per year. And that's per person. And that puts us at the top of the list of many other places. I mean, if you look at China, we're producing about 2.5 times as much municipal solid waste as they are per person. Now, in terms of the overall waste production, the United States isn't number one, but we're definitely up there at about 25.9 metric tons per capita. And we don't usually think in metric tons. So I did a calculation. That's 57,000 pounds per person per year. And that's obviously quite a bit larger than the municipal alone. And the main thing in sharing this with you is to emphasize just how much waste we don't even see. And there's different calculations for that. In fact, all the way back to a World Watch Institute study in 1994, the argument there was that for every bag of trash that you might put curbside, there's about 70 bags of trash upstream that have been created in the process of making those products and distributing those products that ultimately you or I put in the trash can outside. Now, one of the things to note is a lot of waste is not included in the solid waste regulation of the United States. This is from the EPA. And that comes as a surprise to some people. So just to give you an idea of some of the things that are not considered solid waste. We have point source discharge, so say from a smokestack. You have things like spent wood preservatives. We have domestic sewage, which again we talked about last time, would be considered in the liquid stream often that has to be treated. So these things are outside of that. Radioactive waste, surprisingly, fits this description as well. And in terms of hazardous waste, this also comes as a surprise. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about hazardous waste in this video, but just note the things that are not considered hazardous waste in terms of the regulations that exist. One is household hazardous waste, so the things that say maybe be under your sink that are poisonous or toxic. Agricultural waste, mining overburden, fossil fuel combustion waste. There's just a lot of things through various laws and regulations have not fit into hazardous. And, there's obviously people who would argue with this in terms of them being classified this way. Now, what's so important about how we handle this waste? But if we don't handle it properly, here are some of the things that can happen. There's significant negative externalities, and these can have impacts on environment and health. It's obviously mismanaged solid waste can be breeding ground for vermin and insects and so forth that can lead to disease. This is the way many large cities in the United States existed with 100 or a little bit more than 100 years ago. It's just kind of fantastical to read the stories about how solid waste was not processed properly, not disposed of properly, and a lot of people got sick. When you collect solid waste, you often, and you put it in a landfill, say, you're going to produce a lot of methane. And methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, much more potent than CO2, molecule for molecule, multiple 20 to 30 times more significant. So this is something we have to think about as well. And I'll get into that a little bit later. What can we do with solid waste? Well, perhaps we can recycle or reuse it. That would be the best thing to do. If we can't recycle or reuse it, then we need to put it in the ground. It's one idea. It's called landfill. We can burn it. That's called incineration. Or we can ship it away. Now, of course, shipping away is likely to lead to either landfill or incineration by someone else. But that's often something that is done with our municipal waste. And speaking of which, international waste is a major problem. You may have heard, not just a few years ago, China said we're not taking any more of the plastic that the world had basically shipped there in the form of recycling. And that caused major changes within the recycling patterns throughout the world. China was the largest taker of that material. Now we see in this article here from a couple years back that Malaysia, another Southeastern Asian country, was tired of receiving all of this plastic material as well. And so this creates a problem because sending it away, there is no way, as some people would say. And if you look at the countries that are leading the world in plastic exports, the United States is not number one. Germany and the Netherlands and Japan are much higher, but the United States certainly is in the top 10. Speaking of incineration, it was very popular in the United States last century, 1970s and 1980s. This took off, and then we came to find out that when you burn trash, it kind of goes away, but it doesn't go away. That material often leads to new materials, and it spreads throughout the air, and then obviously lands on the ground, which then gets into our streams, into our fish, into our bodies, and it's a real problem. So as you can see here, if you live next to waste incineration, it is a burden on you. It will reduce your lifespan, and unfortunately, in the United States, a majority of people who live next to such facilities are people of color, and that's a significant problem. Also, many of the impoverished people in this country live next to such plants as well. What about recycling? Well, as you can see here, these are the recycling rates of recent memory. And you can see that some countries in Europe have a bit better than 50%. This is overall recycling, not specific products. Very few are above 50%. The United States is a dismal 32%. Canada is even less than that. Look at Japan, 20%. And surprisingly, Costa Rica, which often gets designated one of the greenest countries in the world, has a very, very low recycling rate. And so, this has something to do with policy, has to do with how people respond to recycling and how it's incentivized. Furthermore, when we look at plastic recycling in the United States, this is an article just came out a couple years ago. Plastic recycling is less than 10%, and this is very problematic. And then more recent studies show that it's maybe even half that. And why is this? This has to do with the fact that recycling is a profit-driven industry. And so when a country doesn't incentivize it and doesn't, provide some subsidies for it so that it can weather the variability in the pricing markets of either glass or plastic or metals, it can really be a problematic industry and not one that is sufficient to deal with the problems that we face. And we all know about plastics that have disseminated throughout the planet. We've got gyres in a couple of oceans that have way too much plastic, have more plastic than life, which is kind of scary to think about, but there are many areas where that's the case. And so we need to do a much better job of dealing with our plastic, and I'll make a suggestion in a little bit about that. How does Galesburg work. So in these videos, I'm focusing on the city that I'm the mayor of, and we have currently a 5-year residential contract with Waste Management, and that contract is as follows. We have weekly curbside pickup. We have a 96-gallon container that is shared. Every resident house gets one address, and that material goes to a landfill about 8 miles from Galesburg. Twice a month, we have recycling pickup, another 96-gallon container for that. Once a month, we have a special large item that can be picked up, but you have to call for that, and that's a new part of the plan. Previously, we had twice a year, we had to pick up everything in the spring and fall, and this led to a lot of complications, partly because just enough of the people did not respect the trash guidelines. It was supposed to be organized and orderly, not just everything like in your front yard type of thing, and that caused a lot of challenges for the company to do this in an effective manner. So they shifted to a different form of contract that is in place. Lawn waste pickup is also is taken. That can include things like your lawn clippings, but also maybe some branches and twigs from the yard and so on. It also may include some weeding that you do, but it's not a compost in itself. It's not for food and other things. And so that is how we do it here, and that material goes to the landfill where it's put on a different part of the landfill and used to make humus, which is a final product of compost. And that material often is used to top the landfill on a daily basis. When trash is dumped, they cover it so that it avoids it flying around. In the new contract, we have a new program called At Your Door, and that allows people to discard hazardous materials, chemicals and such, batteries, and even electronics. All they have to do is make a call and set up an appointment, and those materials will be removed. This is a really important program. Probably a lot of people don't know about it, and that's why I'm here to talk about it. So kudos to everyone who got that added to our contract. It's a great program, and we need to utilize it more, because otherwise, if there isn't a way to easily discard these products, they often go down the drain, and that's not good for anybody. When we look at the waste hierarchy, this is kind of a good important way to think about it, right? The first thing we want to do is just prevent waste. So that would be perhaps reducing consumption. That's where the waste starts. Then we could reduce our waste by eating more of the food that you cook would be an example, or not being over consumptive with various products that you might use, using them responsibly. Like, for instance, simple as like not leaving your flashlight on with the batteries, right? Shutting it off when you're not using it. That can allow the batteries to last longer and reduce our waste. Reusing things is very important in terms of the next step. If we can find valuable reuse, whether it be, a shirt becomes a rag to clean the house as opposed to just immediately dumped in the trash, that could be a beneficial thing. Or maybe the shirt could be sent to one of our many, many thrift stores in Galesburg, or wherever you might be. If reuse is not is not available, then recycling it. There are products that can be recycled, say books and such. The materials there can be separated and be reused. Not only things like plastics and glass, and particularly metals, which are very, very importantly recycled. And then if recycling isn't available, then we can recover. And that might, speak to getting energy from it, right? Getting some value from it. And we can see that both in terms of the standard municipal waste, but also things like compost material and so on. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to dispose of it. And then hopefully we've done our due diligence in the previous 5 steps so that our disposal is minimal. Landfills can be done right. This is the most common way trash is dealt with in this country, in the United States. Separate the hazards and recycled material first. We need to cover it daily, as I mentioned, with dirt or maybe some lawn materials and such that keep the trash from blowing around. Kind of keeping it covered is very beneficial. At some point, we need to extract and treat the leachate. When you put lots of materials on top of each other, of course, some of them turn to liquid and then can leach out into the groundwater. So if you can catch it before it does that and treat it, we do that at Galesburg, and that's very important. As I mentioned, there's a lot of methane emissions. When you put lots of trash on top of each other, it creates methane, and the microbes do. And if we can capture that and we can use it as a fuel, a lot of landfills capture their methane. We do not at this time. Then we might have the surrounding areas be natural areas. This buffers it from, say, housing zone, or residential area, or even industrial, or even potentially, commercial zone. You want your landfill to be separated from those kind of areas, and so having some buffer natural areas, it could be a way to support the local ecology. And then when a landfill, which can only be built up so high before it becomes dangerous, then we need to move to another area. And while that landfill is elevated, at that point, it can be reused. And I've seen them reused as parks or recreational areas. An old landfill that we have in Galesburg is now a park, one of our bigger parks. And this is very common and something that can be beneficial to a community. Waste to energy can be done. Incinerators. Now, incinerators can just burn trash, but now there's a move towards burning that and creating energy as a result. And that sounds well and good. And I mean, it certainly is a way to get a usable product from the trash in a very direct way. The problem is that most of the incinerators that were built last century, and even many that are being built now, are not advanced. They are using simplistic kind of technologies, and therefore they don't deal with the hazard emissions that are being emitted, the effluent. And this is a problem. So you can extract energy, but in order to do this in a workable way, I addressed such a site in the first video of this series, in a European location. It can be done, but it does require a significant amount of investment, and it does have to be prioritized. So I would say this is something that still needs further investment and research. Large-scale composting. So in Dhaka, Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries in the world, they adopted a solid waste master plan. And in that, they recognized that almost 80% of what was being thrown out was organic matter. And that's the majority. And so they decided that they were going to create composting centers throughout the city. And that was fantastic response from the community. They had created jobs, it created fertilizer that could be used. And it was really positive. So even in a very, very poor country, this can be a very beneficial type of way to deal with waste and reduce their waste significantly. Even in more advanced countries, more wealthy countries in particular, this can be done. It does cost a bit extra for people to do this, and most communities don't yet do it, but more and more communities are doing this so that people can compost, take your food waste, for instance, take your lawn, put lawn materials, and that's all organic material that can then be broken down over time and then reused as fertilizer. And it creates a lot of jobs. So there is benefit to do it in both wealthy and poor regions. Scavengers. This sounds, maybe it's a bad word in some contexts, but in Bogota, Colombia, there's a zero waste program. And so whereas in the past, a lot of people who would recycle did so kind of illegally, and it created a lot of tension, and a lot of people were fighting for the material and charging, outrageous amounts. So they actually made it such that it formalized it. And so now the state recognizes this as a very reputable type of exercise, and it dignifies the labor of these individuals and it pays them appropriately. So all that is good and could be considered a vital role in lots of communities. There's a lot of material that is often thrown out that could be reused. You know, a lot of people throw, say, used toasters away or even larger appliances. They just throw them in the garbage and they go to the waste, they go to the landfill. If there was a mechanism for reusing that metal and reincorporating it, it would be beneficial. And, you know, even in, this is a relatively poor country, but in other even wealthier countries, thinking about how we can collect our enormous amount of waste, and much of the waste that we collect, some of it is organic, as I mentioned, but some of it is also has high levels of metals or other products that can be reused. And encouraging that kind of activity is difficult because it has to be organized and it can't just be random. But if they can do it in Bogota, we could certainly do it in the United States. Waste is a complicated, multidimensional issue. We have too much waste because we consume too much, and we often do so without enough thought. What to do with it, where to put it. Historically, this has been a politician's nightmare, right? Don't put it in my neighborhood. Don't put it where my constituents are. Put it elsewhere. Well, elsewhere is usually somebody else's district or someone else's ward or somebody else's community. So it's not an easy thing to do, and often this has led to people in the United States or municipalities actually sending their waste overseas. And there's been a lot of pushback now in recent years to stop that practice. But then if it stays here, what do we do with it? So something we have to work out. We have to work out at not community by community, but actually maybe at a higher scale of political organization. Management challenges, of course. How do we even get the trash picked up? I mean, during COVID, we saw a period where we didn't have enough workers, and that just created more troubles. And then we have trucks, and trucks are very expensive, and trucks weren't being built as fast. And so then we had limited trucks. And then we've got apartments and homes in different commercial, residential areas that are trying to be picked up, but they're all a little different. They all produce a little bit different types of waste, different amounts and volumes and such. And so it's a really difficult area that every community needs to be handled properly. But I want to emphasize, right, if it's done correctly, you can improve public health. You can protect it. You can improve air quality. You can create jobs and good paying jobs and maintain those jobs through time, because you're going to have trash. Trash is real, and it's going to, even if we reduce the amount of it, it's still going to be something we have to deal with in the future. And lastly, social justice. We talked a little bit about scavengers, that issue, but just in terms of those who do this work in our community, it's very important that they are protected. It's a hazardous job. You have to work night and day. Often you work super early in the morning. You work in horrible conditions, be it rain or snow or frigid temperatures or extreme heat. Just imagine if you had to go to work every day and pick up trash in your community. It's a lot of hard work, but yet if it's properly supported and respected, it can, and it's every part of the city gets equal treatment, then it can promote social justice. That's it for today. I'll see you guys next time. We're going to talk about the amazing and exciting topic of energy. See ya.